G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. And you know, one of my favourite guilty pleasures is just kicking back and binging through a good crime series on Netflix. Criminal Minds was my latest one, and man was it good. But one thing I feel exactly zero guilt about is how much I enjoy playing Best Fiends. Best Fiends gives me an endless source of fun that I can access anytime right on my phone. It's a match 3 puzzle game like none other, with literally thousands of levels and new content added all the time. I've been playing for a while now, and I'm a little obsessed, to be honest. Oh, maybe a lot obsessed. I've really enjoyed some of the latest levels and puzzles though, especially some of the boss levels, and I've been playing it at night in bed when I can't sleep. It really helps to just take my mind off of things and to relax a bit. I think I've been playing it casually for like maybe a year now too, and I'm a little over 900 levels in, and I'm still finding new elements to the game. And I think that's what I really love about Best Fiends the most. Yes, it's a fantastic boredom quencher, it's great for casual gameplay in moments of downtime throughout the day, but I also love that more levels, events, challenges are always being added, so the game never really runs out of things to do. It's also free to download, and seriously, once you download Best Fiends, boredom won't stand a chance. So, download Best Fiends free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. Man, it makes me cringe realizing just how long ago this was. Nearly 25 years ago when I was in my early 20s. I was sharing a house with a couple of guys. We were all in the same religious order. It was a great house to live in because we kept a tidy house and a roster for housework and cooking duties. But I digress. So, me and one of the other guys had a day off, and I suggested that we go for a hike to a place that I visited every few months or so. It was a big granite outcrop in the middle of Victoria, southeastern Australia. There was a lookout at one outcrop, the lower one, that had a car park and a well-formed path to the top. And there was a dirt road that went for about 3 kilometres between that outcrop and the bigger, higher one. The dirt road curves around, but I used to like to walk through the bush between the two outcrops and climb the bigger one. These outcrops had a lot of huge granite boulders, some the size of a house even. You can climb some of them and jump from one to another like a big natural kids' playground almost. But anyway, we parked and walked up to the lookout. Nothing unusual. There wasn't anyone else around or any other cars, but this is not totally unusual for a weekday out there. We looked around at the surrounding countryside and after a few minutes walked back down the path and passed the cart across to the other outcrop. At that point, we both saw a man coming up the road, but he had 4 legs and 4 arms, it looked like. Not like they were naturally growing out of his torso, but like a video processing a glitch, where the 2 parts of the picture were doubled and sort of out of sync, one covering the other, about a third overlapping. It took a few seconds for us to actually work out what we were seeing, sort of like your brain trying to make sense of what you're looking at. I kept looking and trying to work out what was wrong with what I was seeing. I could tell by how my friend was acting too that he also saw something wrong. After maybe about probably 10 seconds, no, it felt a lot longer, we realized what we were seeing was actually what we were seeing. And at that, we both started walking really quickly the other way. We were headed back to the lookout, but the car was just 50 meters away. We started going back up the track again and then both stopped and thought, what are we doing? We need to just get back in the car, right? I could see the man getting closer, but he was still a ways off. We jumped in the car as quickly as we could, and I spun it around and got the heck out of there. Another weird thing about this guy, though, was that he was wearing a yellow tan top, maybe a jacket, and a turquoise pants. A really weird combination for where we lived. I didn't have to ask my friend, did you see that, because it was obvious that he had. And as we calmed down, we kept saying, what the heck was that? I don't know what that was, but man, I'm glad we got out of there. We eventually got to the next town and We bought some lunch and a drink, and we didn't talk about it to anyone or each other really ever again. However, now having heard some stories here, I often wonder if he saw exactly what I saw too, or if he saw something equally weird, but different. So about 15 years ago, I was living with my ex-girlfriend and my sister and her husband in an old house not far from town. Within the first few weeks of living there, strange things were happening regularly. Lights going out randomly, noises upstairs. At one point, one of the windows at the back of the house was cut, like someone went at it with a glass cutter trying to break in but gave up on it and left. Just really creepy stuff like that. That was bad enough, but things got pretty severe as time went on, and one week in particular was just absolutely crazy. The first thing that happened that week was one Tuesday night. Everyone was working and I was home alone watching TV when I noticed our cat was acting really weird. It backed into a corner and arched up like it was scared. When I went to get up, the electricity went out in the house and it was pitch black inside. And the second that happened, I heard really loud footsteps running down the stairs, straight at me. I got up and braced myself for whatever it was, but when I did, there was nothing. I stood there for a moment, and then eventually gathered myself and went outside to the front garden to check if other houses' lights were on, but my house was the only one that was dark. I went to the fuse box and reset the trip switch, and all was back to normal. A few days later, I think it was a Thursday, we were all in the sitting room watching a movie with pizza and lights on and a good atmosphere in the house when, out of nowhere, a massive bang happens upstairs. We go up to check it out, and I went into our bedroom and saw my bedside table was now in the middle of the room. Mind you, this bedside table was really heavy, so there's no way that it could move by itself. But the worst and last thing that happened to me was on a Saturday night, and I will never forget this. It still gives me chills when I even think about it. We go to bed, everything's normal, watch a bit of a movie and fall asleep. I wake up facing the wall and glance at the alarm clock. It read 3:13. I turn over to go back to sleep and I see my ex standing in the middle of the room. Confused, I begin to sit up to ask her what's up, but as I start to sit up, I realize that my ex is actually asleep in the bed next to me. Instantly, a surge of fear runs through me and I'm frozen to the spot. My eyes adjust and I barely make out the figure now, but it's a young girl in a nightdress with a cartoon character on it, soaking wet with her head down looking at the floor. I can even hear the water drop onto the carpet, and I'm just sitting there, just completely in shock. Couldn't believe my eyes. After a couple of seconds, though, it just kind of melts away, like fades out of sight. I got up and turned on the lights, rubbed my eyes, and tried to tell myself that it must have been a night terror or something, but the problem with that was that there was water on the floor, a wet patch where she was standing. And it wasn't long after that I moved out. I can still picture her to this day, though, and it was the creepiest thing that I've ever experienced. I grew up in a small town in Nova Scotia, very rural, and one night a group of us, 6 or so, were walking around town at night. I would have been about 15, 16 years old at the time, so about maybe 11 or 12 years ago. Now, there's a graveyard there that you have to get by walking down a very long wooded path. It opens up into an open, sort of hilly area with no houses nearby at the end, surrounded by trees. We were all just sort of messing around in the graveyard, doing the usual stuff that we try to spook each other out and see if we can see anything spooky. But we'd been there for probably about 45 minutes and got burned out on the spook factor, so we were just gabbing away when my friend Jay pointed out that a light was moving weird in the sky. We looked up and, yeah, a distinct light was moving across the sky. But then it would make like 90-degree turns on a dime. No curving into it or anything. Just bam, right-hand turn. We were sort of debating what it could be too, when all of a sudden it just exploded into a fireball. But there was no sound, which was weird. And when that happened, the whole lighting outside changed just by a little bit. Imagine there was a dimmer outside for starlight. Well, it was as if the entire ambient light changed for like a split second. It wasn't like it lit up from the explosion too, but as soon as that happened, all of us looked at each other and broke into a sprint. We didn't need to say anything, we all just sensed something was really weird. We ran through the graveyard though and down the long wooded pathway. My friend C and I were at the back of the group and slowed to walk once we started getting near the end. Everyone was just talking ahead about what the heck that we just saw. As C and I are talking though, we then hear sticks breaking to our left. Instantly, I looked over and say, "What the heck is that?" And there's what looks like a completely naked, sort of thin child or something lurching through the woods, approximately 10 feet from us, but its skin was so white that it almost looked like it was glowing. I don't think it was, but it sort of looked like that. It was just kind of slowly lurching in our direction, moving through the sticks. Well, we immediately ran, yelling, "There's something in the woods here," but I wanted to be sure because, I thought that I was going to regret it if I didn't double check. So I backtracked a little bit just to confirm that I was seeing what I thought I was. And yeah, it was just that. A naked, pale, sort of humanoid thing walking slowly through the woods. We ran away again to the end of the pathway, and only one other friend had seen what we saw, but not as close as us. The time between the explosion in the sky and the thing in the woods was probably no more than like 2 minutes at the most. 4 years ago, though, I messaged my friend that I was walking with that night. We don't really hang out or talk that much anymore, just to see if our memories were the same, and yeah, he confirmed everything. I'm 27 now, and even with my skeptical about everything sort of attitude, I really just don't know how to explain this one. I'm not sure if the thing in the sky was related to the thing in the woods, but I can only assume so, right? It was a very weird experience, but another interesting bit of info is that the small area that I grew up in is home to a UFO incident, Shag Harbor UFO incident. And in the wiki info it states that a pilot was being followed by a craft and it exploded but made no sound, which was very similar to what we saw, and very interesting for sure. So it was a beautiful Friday, and I was still somewhat fresh into my relationship with the love of my life. I had a week earlier decided to finally quit the nasty substances in my life, and had made it one whole week without using. How did my addict mind know how to celebrate? Well, get another bag, of course. We were spending the day hiking through the beautiful wooded areas. And what I didn't predict was just how far down my tolerance had gone, and I was getting progressively naughty, but wrote it off to my girl as just being sick. As the night began to wind down, we decided to get a fire going on this very remote hilltop, way out in the sticks, to just sit back and watch the stars. But while we're chilling there, we notice a car pull up, and while we were a little curious, it wasn't like it's private land or anything. We continue talking and cuddling up next to our fire, thinking maybe it's just some kids getting high or whatever. Next thing I know, I see this man appear out of the dark on the path. He's walking along looking like maybe he's going to a lookout area to watch some stars too. But as he passes, I greet him with a, "Hey, how's it going?" And the guy literally just stares at us without saying a word in return and walks past. But the look on his face, though, was just borderline evil. No expression, just deadpan. It was very odd, but I'm a tough guy, so I'm not too worried. He walks past a bit later, It's a one-way in and out deal sort of thing, and gets into his truck to drive off. Or so he thought. Now, remember, I'm pretty faded and the nods are getting me bad at this point. I'm going in and out of some dream world and was speaking out loud what I was experiencing in this said dream world, aka pretty high. My girl starts to hear something rustling around in the trees and tries to alert me, but I'm just too faded at first to get what she's saying. But eventually she gets my attention, and as soon as I heard it, my adrenaline made me go from dopey to high alert. Now, I grew up in the woods, and I know how animals act and how they move and stuff. And this clearly was not an animal. It was making way too much noise, and when I tried to yell to scare it off, it would stop moving for a second. It felt like it was getting closer and closer, though, to the point where I grabbed a big log and began screaming at the woods, "Come on then, I know you're in there." And as I said that, whoever it was in there ran wildly, crashing through branches as they went. We decided at that point that it was best to just get out of there. So we packed up and walked out, log in hand for protection. And what we saw as we went out still freaks me out. So we saw that guy's same truck pulled down the road, a ways into some trees. That creepy guy, whoever he was, tried to hide his truck to come and stalk us, and he was still out there somewhere, perhaps even watching as we were leaving. Needless to say, I was beyond freaked out at this point. We ran our butts out of there, and we didn't feel safe until we got home. When I think back on it, I really hope that he was just thinking that he had a peek of some potential action, but with how far out we were, anything could have happened. This was a major wake-up call for me, though, and I was incapacitated and unable to protect the fullest love of my life, and from there out, I had a few relapses, but that was the beginning of the end for me. For reference, too, I haven't touched anything in over a decade. So to preface this story, I'm a paramedic and I have been for about 10 years. Working in emergency medicine, you get to see the weirdest and the worst of people, so it's not too uncommon for these types of stories to exist. However, in my 10 years, I have never experienced pure terror incarnate like I had about 6 years ago. I won't be revealing specific or identifying details as it pertains to privacy and HIPAA. This may be a bit long too, but I hope it's worth the listen. So, about 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city, as well as the country, which had a few other small towns. The city itself was not a large city, sub 100,000 people, I would say. Working for that service required working 24-hour shifts, though. It wasn't particularly busy. Maybe you'd get 5 to 10 calls in 24 hours and generally get some decent sleep at night. This city was a pretty rough place as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folks from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. But one night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information that we had was that a person in an apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbors screaming for help. We responded emergent as the details were very limited. When we arrived on scene, the police and the fire department were already there, and we were getting ready to make entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment she'd heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make entry. Luckily, though, the landlord showed up and he gave us a key to get into the unit. And as we opened that door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. The police entered first, and with our flashlights we followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and the dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating too when I say that there were literally 5-foot-tall mountains of garbage, food, dishes in the kitchen, and the same in the living room, but with magazines and clothes and garbage just everywhere. and this meant that there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate this apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead where the bedroom and the bathroom were. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door as there was a light shining from underneath. The officer opened the door and just stood in the hallway, and with a flat tone he said, "She's in here." I walk in first into the bathroom, and the first thing that I notice is the peculiarity of the light in the bathroom. It's a very pale yellow light, coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off a really odd vibe as it was just so unnatural. But the next thing I notice is the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks, just nothing. Empty, in fact. Except the vanity which contained the sink. On top and in the bowl of the sink were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were opened and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. And the last thing that I noticed was the body of an elderly woman lying naked in the tub. As I walk closer, I can see her lying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin is pale and there's about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes were closed and her head is against the bottom of the tub with her mouth and nose completely submerged under the water. My partner steps in behind me. He suggests that we call the coroner and inform them of the body. 2 officers pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so there's 4 of us up in this tiny bathroom with me next to this lady in the tub. And with me being who I am, I decide to do my due diligence and at least make sure the lady is dead. So I kneel down next to the tub and reach my arm in and put my fingers on her neck, attempting to check for a pulse. And in an instant, without warning or the slightest hint of movement, this woman springs up out of the tub with the agility and speed of like a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was just to stand up as quick as possible, and I just stood there staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes wide as can be, before she started just screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best as she could while still sitting in the water. I quickly look around and notice that everyone else who was in the bathroom with me has bolted out of there, not a single soul in sight. I try to steel myself and try calming the lady down, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied screaming and told me that she does this every morning as she had some kind of joint condition and soaking in warm water helps ease her joint pain. Now, at this point, I have my doubts and I have to question this woman's sanity for sure. So I question her regarding self-harm and address what potentially could be interpreted as suicidal behavior. She denies all of it though, and the next step is to determine her mental capacity to ensure that she's in the right frame of mind and to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all of my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per the law, she's able to refuse any and all care as she's mentally sound. I do ask her if she'll at least let me check her vitals so that I can be sure that she's healthy and I can add it to my report. She vehemently refuses though and tells me to get out of her house, which she has the right to. I acknowledge that and I have her sign a refusal of service form, and as I leave the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with the 2 other officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, they're all just sort of staring at me with eyes wide and gaping mouths, speechless. In the end, I don't say a word and we all leave the apartment. Once we're all outside, though, I had the most uneasy and uncontrolled fit of laughter that I've ever had. My partner and the officers started laughing too, but I honestly thought that I may have even crapped myself. My partner told me later that all he remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh crap," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. And you know, I wish that I could say that I never saw this lady again, but that would be untrue. So this one should be a bit shorter since you already have the backstory. But like I said, after this call, I was just sort of able to laugh about it once my heart stopped racing. I figured that I would never have to see this lady again, and that gave me a lot of comfort. I told the story several times to family, friends, and co-workers, just because of the sheer shock value. But this part of the story I've only really told to a couple of people because most probably can't stomach it, so be warned, this will contain some pretty graphic content or imagery. So about 3 months after the first call with the bathtub lady, I'm working with another EMT basic partner, and not the same one as before, but he is well aware of the story. So the day is going by like normal, and nightfall comes. I'm hoping to get some sleep, as generally night is a little calmer. Each of our stations have a few bedrooms with twin beds to allow us to at least sleep somewhat comfortably. I take off my boots and I lay down and doze. I always keep my radio turned way up and by my head so I can wake up if we get a call. And sure enough, tones drop on the radio and I wake up. Looking at the clock, it's around 4 a.m. Radio traffic requests the ambulance for a welfare check on an individual who hasn't been seen for a while. Me and my partner get up, put our boots on, and we start responding to the address. As we get closer, though, I start recognizing the area. And before I even see the building, I tell my partner, I swear to you that if this is the same lady, then he just laughs and we continue. As we pull up on the scene, yep, it's that same building. At this point, my heart starts to race again. A few officers are already on the scene. As I get out of the ambulance, one of the officers comes up and tells me, "Hey, the lady that we're here for has a friend that works at the gas station nearby here. The friend told 911 that the lady usually comes and visits him every day, but that the friend hasn't seen her in a few weeks." The officer also tells me that there's an odor coming from the apartment complex. Now, if you work in EMS or have been around such, you know what that means. And if not, I won't spoil it just yet. So I ask the officer if she's familiar with this person or has heard the story of the last encounter. The officer tells me that she's not, but her two co-workers behind her, they were actually on the original call with me and are smiling, but not saying a word. I tell the officer who the person is and our last run-in with her. The officer just raises her eyebrow a bit and says okay. So we approach the apartment complex yet again, and as I open the main door, you can immediately smell the odor permeating through the entire complex. We walk downstairs to the door of this lady's apartment. I bang on the door a few times and shout, "Ambulance." No response. Officers bang on the door. No response again. We try to get a hold of the landlord again to give us access, but he's unavailable. Over the radio, I request the fire department and request that they bring the door spreader. The fire department arrives and they come downstairs and set up the door spreader. If you don't know what a door spreader is, it's basically a tool that the fire department places between the two door jambs, and they use a lever to start pressing the door jambs apart, freeing the latch from the door frame so you can get in. And as they finally get the door open, that awful wafting smell just spills out into the apartment. Same thing as last time, though. Pitch black in the apartment, piles of garbage all around the apartment 5 feet high that barely allow you to move through. Though, this time, it's a bit different, because there are thousands of flies buzzing around. Again, the officers enter first with us following with our flashlights. One of the male officers gets down the hallway to the bathroom and opens the door. He looks back to me, shakes his head, and continues forward. My EMT partner, who is pretty new, is right behind me. I turn to him and tell him to wait in the hallway and that I'll let him know if I need him. I was trying to be nice and spare him. The officer continues down the hallway toward the bedroom. At this point, the anxiety is increasing because now we're in uncharted territory and once again, I have no idea what we're going to find. The officer eventually makes it to the bedroom. I see him shine his light into the bedroom and then uses the bend of his elbow to cover his mouth and nose, and he waves me over. As I walk to him, the smell just gets stronger. I peer into the bedroom with my flashlight, and that was when I saw her. The bedroom is actually set up so that the bed is right in the middle of the room with the head pressed against the wall, so there's some space on either side and at the foot of the bed. Or at least there would be if the floors weren't filled up to the height of the bed with clothes and magazines and books and food and garbage and just everything you can imagine. At the foot of the bed are two large 4-foot-tall piles of just random crap that at the base are probably 4 feet in diameter. I know that it's hard to visualize this, but picture two large cone-shaped mounds side by side at the foot of the bed. And in the tiny space between the two huge mounds and the foot of the bed lies Bathtub Lady. Now, this lady is a very small old lady, and when I saw her the first time, she maybe weighed 90 pounds. She was also a white lady. But stunned for a moment, I stand there next to the officer and just sort of look. Because this is the part that gets, well, pretty gross. So Bathtub Lady is lying perfectly on her back with her arms folded up and crossed in front of her like you would see a skeleton doing in the movies. Bathtub Lady's skin looks almost like paper. It's dried out and shrunken, turning black and rotting. The level of decomposition from her is one that I hadn't seen before. Her hip bones were visible where the skin had cracked and receded. Her kneecaps were coming through her skin. A few ribs were just barely visible poking through the skin on the sides of her upper abdomen. And her hair was beginning to fall out. Her lips were gone, her eyes were gone. I got a bit closer to look, and all I kept thinking was, if you wake up, this officer is probably going to draw and shoot you in the head. I walked up a little closer to look nevertheless. She was almost perfectly preserved, like a mummy or something. There was absolutely nothing left of her eyes. The sockets were completely empty with the exception of maggots crawling around in the sockets. From behind me were a couple of quiet, muffled gags, and I walked back out to my partner. I tell him, "Hey, sorry man, but we need the body bag and I'm gonna need your help in here." And everyone walks outside to get some fresh air. The officer that was in the bathroom with me gagged a few more times outside, but luckily didn't vomit. The one good thing about this, though, is that we had recently been given these really nice PAPR respirators from FEMA for a recent Ebola outbreak. My partner grabbed the body bag and I grabbed the PAPRs. We put our gear on and we walked back inside. The officer that was with me, like a true champ, came back inside without a respirator as well and held the flashlight for us. Me and my partner had to spend 10 minutes just clearing out all of the trash so that we had enough room to put the body bag down next to the Bathtub Lady. Once we got enough room, the sketchy part came. If you've ever seen a body with that amount of decomposition, then you know that it's very brittle. We attempted to move her as carefully as we could as to not break anything. However, when we attempted to move her, she was stuck. And honestly, I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at the head, my partner was at the feet trying to move her over. I put my arms down her back and neck to support the head so that it didn't break off. I got down to look as we lifted, to see what we were getting stuck on. And as I lifted, I saw, but it was already too late. As I lifted, the skin on her back was stuck to the carpet. So as I lifted, it started peeling off her ribs and spine. We had no other choice, though, as we were unable to cut the carpet at this time. So as we lifted her up, all of the skin came off her back and stayed stuck to the floor, almost like some sort of sick chalk outline, which, when I saw it, what seemed to be like thousands of maggots crawling around on the inside of her skin, between the skin and her back, came pouring out. Well, we moved her gently into the bag, luckily not breaking anything. We got the bag out and into the ambulance, where we would then transport her to the funeral home with our windows rolled down and emergent, so we wouldn't have to stay in the ambulance as long as possible. So, that's my story of Bathtub Lady. And I'm sorry for the gross details, but it's all sort of part of the story. What we figured, though, is that she must have died shortly after our first encounter with her, and that we may have been the last ones to actually see her alive.